I invite our panelists to join us on camera for a discussion on culturally responsive pedagogy. Give them a moment to do that. All right. I'd like to reintroduce you to Dr. Glenabah Martinez, Dr. Timothy Begaye, and Dr. Mark Ericson, who is having a little bit of technical difficulties. We hope he'll be back on the line here shortly. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise with us this afternoon. We are going to use some questions that we have predetermined, and some are based on feedback that we received through participant registration, the registration process rather. So we'll walk through some of these questions. I invite our panelists to jump in, share your experiences as we go. And we'll begin first with Dr. Glenabah Martinez.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. This is Glenabah, and I'm speaking to you from my office here at the University of New Mexico, and it's so good to see all the participants online for this important discussion. Well, first of all, I wanted to preface my remarks with thanking all the faculty at Santa Fe Indian School, and as we have represented here, we have Dr. Dozier Enos, as well as we have Dr. Space on this, not Dr. Space, I'm sorry, Mark. We have him online here. They have done some tremendous work at Santa Fe Indian School. It is known in the community of New Mexico as the top school to send your children to. And they've made some big changes. My brother attended Santa Fe Indian School, and interestingly enough, my grandparents were forced to attend Santa Fe Indian School in 1915. And so when you hear the stories, I grew up hearing the oral histories about Santa Fe Indian School, the military paradigm of teaching them doing formation marching and all those types of things. And now we see the wonderful holistic approach to education. I think that's a wonderful change and redefining, re-articulating what we want for an educated Native person. So I want to thank you all, my SFIS brothers and sisters who are on this call. Thank you very much for your work. This is very important work. So I am a faculty member here at the University of New Mexico. I do social studies methods, as well as I teach graduate level courses in sociology of ed, history of ed, those types of courses, critical curriculum studies. And I'm also the director of the Institute for American Indian Education, and that you can see that up on your screen right there. In about 2017, the Institute for American Indian Education faculty, Native faculty from all 5 departments of the College of Education and some from Native American Studies, conducted a series of community forums across the state. So we were in Mescalero, Dulce, Shiprock, Gallup, Taos. We were all over the place. And basically in our community engagement, we were asking parents, we were asking people at the meetings what their vision was of an educated Native person. Fundamentally, we also wanted to ask them questions about if you had a teacher, if your child could have a teacher, what types of characteristics and skills would you want this teacher to have? We also talked about a number of other questions. And so we collected a lot of information. And based upon that, we were able to come up with our guiding principles here, which you see in front of you. And so one of them was, the first one was educator preparation. And when I hear and when I listen to the conversation about what's happening at Santa Fe Indian School, it definitely is a commitment to culturally responsive educator preparation. This idea that we have to have teachers who can affirm the historical and contemporary presence of Indigenous peoples through the content, through pedagogy and assessment. And it's important that this supports the integrity of Native languages, cultures, and sovereignty. And so at UNM and any institute of higher learning, we want to make sure that our pre-service educators are mindful of how their dispositions and cultural biases can affect pedagogy and relationships with Indigenous youth, families, and communities. A second part here, which my colleague, Dr. Begaye, will talk a little bit about more, has to do with leadership. And again, we see this at Santa Fe Indian School, leadership that affirms Indigenous governance and sovereignty in the preparation of educational leaders. So what they're doing at Santa Fe Indian School is they're preparing, they have transformational and visionary leaders who are cognizant of the fact that many of our students who attend Santa Fe Indian School have very deep connections to their Native communities. So they're aware of that. So their calendar is based upon our own, maybe what some people call feast days, our obligations that are not open to the public. They're aware of that. And the leadership, in fact, cultivates a very caring atmosphere for that. And why? Because leadership, governance, sovereignty, they're all intermingled, and that's important. Finally, or not finally, a third one has to do with curriculum, and this is centering Indigenous knowledge and skills. And this is where we feel in IAIE that the curriculum must counter the pattern of settler colonial narratives and practices on Indigenous peoples by privileging Indigenous epistemologies. And this is exactly what we see Santa Fe Indian School doing. They are centering Indigenous experiences, the lived experiences, our epistemology, our Indigenous knowledge and skills as a place to move on to then merging into Western constructions of the standards and things of that sort. And then language and culture obviously is important. And we see that happening at Santa Fe Indian School. And then in other words, we know that our students who attend there are going to develop a critical consciousness of the complex issues of language diversity and development. Family and life preparation is critical as well. And I'm going to go fast because I don't want to spend too much time talking. And then finally, individual and community health and wellness. This is critical at intergenerational well-being. That was all connected there. And what I see at Santa Fe Indian School and good schools where we just, Gloria Ladson-Billy talks about just good teaching. It's where we have people, thoughtful professionals who will engage with Indigenous peoples and nations to nurture a culturally grounded way of life and learning that centers on a holistic balance of spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional health. And so I'm so pleased to see this because the principles that I just went over quickly are in alignment with what I see happening at Santa Fe Indian School, and coincidentally, in alignment with what the Dozier Martinez versus State of New Mexico case, the decision, the ruling by Judge Singleton that this was not happening in our public schools. And so all of this happened around 2018, 2019. So I just wanted to share this with you and also just tell and just convey my, again, my good thoughts to Santa Fe Indian School.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez, for sharing those important components and that background. Very interesting. Dr. Mark Ericson has joined us. Welcome back, Mark. Glad to have you on the panel this afternoon. So this question now is for Dr. Begaye. Where can teachers and teacher leaders find resources and other supports that are relevant to their students' heritage and culture? Now, let me add on to that. There's a couple more components perhaps you can think about in your response as well. What recommendations or guidance do you give to teachers and teacher leaders about how to incorporate those resources in authentic and meaningful ways?
Well, let me begin. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good, good. Let me begin by saying hello to everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Begaye. I'm Navajo. I'm from Northern Arizona, and I work here in Albuquerque. And I visit a lot of tribal schools all over the country, up in Maine and down to Florida and in Louisiana and in the Northwest. And a lot of these issues that have been brought up right to this point has been really, I feel, really relevant to this discussion. What kind of resources can you find? There are so many out there. The number one thing is you can find all the resources about Native people, Native education, Native governments, and all of that. But you have to be careful of which information you use and which one is more authentic, more so than other, if you will, which can really give you a good picture of what the history of the people are and how education should be brought about. And what you'll find is in many other states now in Montana and the Northwest and up in in the Southwest. And if you look on the State Department of Education's, many of them now have an Indian education unit. And then at those websites, you'll find a lot of resources, places to go, information that you can use for your classroom, whether it's an early childhood level or at the high school level. There's so much resources out there. NAU, Northern Arizona University, they have a Indigenous Language and Culture Conference coming up. And they have a resource site that is pages long, and there's so many really good information. You can get that at Northern Arizona University's website. The state of Washington, the State Department of Education, there has a lot of resources there. They have an Indian education unit. So does Arizona. New Mexico has a huge resource site as well, in addition to what my colleague Glenabah has offered, from her school. UNM has a lot of resources available. You can get them online at their website. You can also talk to people there, professors there, a lot of them. They have information. There's so much there. I mean, it's hard to list them, but it's really simply a matter of just looking online nowadays and popping them up and digging through it all yourself. Yeah, I think you'll know, if you've been in education at some point or another in your past, you'll know which information is good and which one is not so good. So I would suggest all of these sites that where I usually go, and I'm trying to develop a list too myself, and I'll put some of that on the out there for you when we're done with this session.
Great, thank you. Dr. Ericson, I have a question for you this afternoon. You were a part of the design team at Santa Fe Indian School. What considerations were discussed as related to developing an evaluation system that acknowledges the background and experiences of a wide variety of teachers, some Indigenous teachers and some not?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Ericson. I'm sorry that I'm late. I was having some technical issues. I teach in a community-based education department, and I was asked to be to provide my perspective on this. I've taught here at the school for 36 years, and I've seen a very long evolution towards this point where we have the entire school curriculum is tuned to consider community issues, problems, context as the core of a lot of the curriculum here at school. All teachers are required to include community-based units in their curriculum, regardless of subject or grade level. This has grown over a long period of time to become basically institutionalized, so that when we have a variety of teachers of different ethnicities, as well as there's a large Native American population of teachers, but for those teachers that are either new or inexperienced with considering this kind of work, there are many support systems. We have a large number of meetings that look at community issues and how to integrate and create interdisciplinary curriculum that combines these concepts. And we also, throughout the entire culture of the school, there are numerous activities and events that bring people together. So I consider that as a really important support system for those teachers that may be inexperienced with this kind of curriculum and an approach to teaching. We have some interdisciplinary teams at the grade level, as well as across grade levels, that develop interdisciplinary units of study in social studies and mathematics and language arts that all are based in community and culture of the communities we serve and the students we serve. So there are multiple ways that we do this. And I really believe strongly that it's really about the culture among the faculty and the staff that really helps those people who don't have much experience with it to gain that experience and also feel welcomed to the process because it may be new and different to them. And I just think that it's a very exciting time to be in education because of this sort of shifting of the focus of the curriculum back to the communities from which our students come. They come from traditions of communal learning, and so more and more we're developing collaborative strategies in the classroom so that students can work and learn communally. And I could go on, but those are some of the things that come to mind.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Dr. Martinez, do you have any recommendations for ways that these resources and ways of teaching can be integrated into programs with educator growth in mind? For example, how frequently maybe staff meetings or other events or cultural events are held and teachers are a part of those and embedded in those different activities?
Well, that's a really important question that you ask. And I think that we would all agree probably in this group, as well as the people who are the 172 participants would agree that pre-service education is key to developing a strong disposition as a teacher. And when I talk about disposition, I'm talking about one who understands racial literacy, somebody who understands the idea of cultural competency, somebody who understands bilingualism, multilingualism, and the history of the area that you teach. And I think that when a new teacher or part of orientation, once a teacher has been hired into a school district, especially if they come from a place that's very different. And in New Mexico, we have an interesting phenomena of a number of Filipino teachers and Filipina teachers who come in and work in schools that serve a lot of Native students, but that's probably a different conversation. Not to say that that's a critique, but it's an opportunity to then educate the teaching force about that community, talk about the history of the community, because if you understand the history of your community, if you understand the demographic composition of your community, you understand how race operates in your community, then I think that you can then understand how curriculum is a critical part of helping our students understand who they are, as well as understanding how to read and understand society that goes beyond their schools. So this is key, I believe. And so what are some of the resources? Well, what I encourage pre-service educators who are in my class to do is for them to talk to the people in the community. If they work with Indigenous peoples, they should talk to the community there, talk with the Native nations who are in their direct community. You know, what are their thoughts about education? And just really be out there and really go beyond just eating the food and eating and listening to the music. That's a nice entry. But what are the hard issues? What are the difficult histories that precede the teacher before they come into the classroom? Because our students don't come to school as blank, like Paulo Freire would say, they don't come like with nothing with them. They come with lived experiences. They come with strong oral traditions. They come with strong cultural traditions. And some of those run counter to what outside society, a capitalist society, for example, has. And so they need to be aware of that. So I didn't answer it directly, but I think those are the foundational tenets of being able to be an effective educator.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, did somebody have another comment? I thought I heard something. Oh, Okay, Dr. Begaye, let's shift over and talk a little bit about best leadership practices for principals and ways that they can support and sustain culturally responsive teaching practices in their school. What recommendations do you have for school leaders?
I think that
You're muted. There you go.
yeah. You can hear me now?
Yes.
I think for a school teacher, I find that just teaching language or culture or history, native language, culture and history, it's not simply just a matter of teaching. It's from the teacher perspective. How much do you know? How much have you learned? How much cultural context are you familiar with, as Glenabah was referring to earlier? And your ability to be able to be in tune with your environment, the community in which you operate in, the school in which you're working in, is really important. That context, I think, comes first and foremost. And then, and for teachers, and I see this in a lot of our schools, tribal schools, come fall, the first day of school, they don't have a principal, or they do not have a teacher for such. And what the many schools do, they go and find any teacher that they can find. And what happens is, when they get a teacher from the inner cities of New York City, nothing wrong with New York City, but when they get someone way out here on tribal lands, a small school with about 150 students, a principal who may have come from the inner cities of New York and is ready to go to work. But these teachers, these principals, they don't last because they lack that cultural context, as we mentioned earlier. And if they don't have that, if they don't have a community level understanding to the tribal people, they will probably not last, and they will get all frustrated and leave. But what's important is that there is a kind of a support system in place, but it also means that the person who comes here from elsewhere needs to be open-minded about the cultural context in which she is going to operate in. And a lot of times that means it's going to be the native culture. And each native culture is going to be different. Going from Montana to South Dakota to Arizona, New Mexico. And in New Mexico and South, there are over 20 tribes, and each cultural group is going to be different from the other. And you have to understand that. And that's what will help many teachers and principals last. But in the classroom, if you look at the classroom, how can, one of the ways in which I think principals can really be helpful to teachers is that give them a classroom. Just don't have them go from room to somebody else's classroom, to another classroom, and give the classroom teacher a classroom. And then give the teacher sufficient classroom curriculum, teaching material, teaching strategies, information, support that person, because that person, if that person is going to be teaching the native language, local native language, that person is going to know how to do that. But there needs to be a support system in place. And including, one of the things I hear so much about is professional development. Teachers need professional development. They already know what they're doing, but they also like to hear what other teachers are doing. How are they doing their work? They're doing the same thing. Allow them to get together and share their lesson plans. And that's what I hear a lot of. They want to hear what the other teacher is doing, how that one is doing the same, teaching the same language. And the other is to teach those teachers support, and whether that means through funds or support or moral support, they need that. And I think that's one of the things that a principal can do. And the excuse of I don't know the culture of that, or I don't know how to help him, her, that's a poor excuse, I think. They have the expertise, they know what to do. You just have to support them. So give them opportunity and time to get together, to share their ideas, and then give them some sort of room for professional development. They know what to do, and encourage the teachers to kind of move forward and to the community and support that effort when a teacher says an elder in the community wants to come to class and share his or her knowledge. That's what is that kind of support system needs to be in place. It's because it's the elders in the community who have a long history of cultural knowledge, and they are the ones who are experiencing the transitions that we have gone through, a modern society versus the older society in which they come from and where we operate. They've seen that change, they know the change, they know how to talk about it. I think there's so many places, so many areas that we could talk about when it comes to supporting teachers, but it also means supporting those teachers who come from the outside into a community who are open to learning about the community. Those are the ones I find they last longer. Those that are not so open, but those that are not so well educated about the social cultural context of the local tribal group in which the school is located, they don't last. But that's where, as a principal, as an administrator, as someone with authority to run and operate the school, they need that support from you, and that's what I see a lot of in our tribal schools.
Thank you. So, really nurturing those relationships and cultivating those opportunities to embed the community members into the school programs. So shifting just slightly, but not too much, Dr. Ericson, can you talk a little bit about the orientation process for new teachers coming into Santa Fe Indian School? How does the school leadership team help them to acclimate to being in this school environment and teaching in a culturally responsive manner?
Thank you. There are a number of ways that we do that. Sometimes we partner new teachers with other teachers who are more experienced. There are regular meetings that new teachers are required to go to, where they learn from community members and other faculty about the philosophy of working with the students and integrating community concepts into the curriculum. We have, as I mentioned before, a lot of group activities reinforcing the ideal graduate statement, and the skills that were developed and integrated into the Danielson framework. We have, even in our unit plans, we're required to identify core values and focus areas related to that. So there's continuous training about that, and the core values and the ideal graduate skills are they're so ubiquitous around the school that even the students have internalized them, so that when we deliver curriculum and we work with teachers to learn how to do this, we're shifting more and more towards having the students evaluate themselves based upon the ideal graduate skills that they are learning. Then there's a number of other ways. We have a community liaison whose job it is to help new and experienced teachers make connections with community, particularly with what we encourage in terms of getting the students out into the communities to work with community members. And I want to say a little bit about our Senior Honors Project. This is a school-wide symposium that's given at the end of the year, and all seniors are required to do a year-long research project into a community issue or problem of their own choice. It involves some very rigorous academic research, but it's really more focused on action planning and taking actions to try to make change. And for that, many of the students actually work and do research in their own communities through surveys, through actual work and interviews. In fact, interviewing community members is a big part of the Senior Honors Project. So there are a number of ways, and I bring that up because even though many of the teachers aren't teaching Senior Honors Project, many of them do become mentors for the seniors, and in that process, that's another way that these things are reinforced, and then it culminates in a school-wide day of celebration of these projects, a symposium where every student gives their presentation to school community, to family, to leadership, and it's celebrated as a very special day for our school. So I think that there's all these different ways that new faculty and even ones that have been here for a while get steeped in these different concepts. I think it's pretty effective, and I think when you really take a look at these Senior Honors Projects, you get a really good feeling for how successful this is with many of our students. And it really allows them to tap into their own particular interests and talents and gifts and relate that to their communities. So those are some ways.
That's wonderful. I'm sure they're quite proud of those projects, the students as well as the faculty at the school. Can you share a little bit more, Dr. Ericson, about how non-Indigenous staff are made aware of culturally sensitive topics that they might need to be mindful of? Do you talk about that in your staff meetings, or how is that addressed?
When it comes up, we do talk about it, and I am a science teacher, have been from the beginning, and there's certain times when I have actually found out that perhaps I shouldn't be asking certain questions or assuming certain things. I think I'm much better at it now than I was before, but it's a learning process, and there's always someone who can help you do this. We really encourage this sort of working with our faculty or other faculty members, learning from them, sharing ideas. So there are multiple opportunities for this. When it comes to sensitive topics, I can only really speak for my own particular curriculum, which is an environmental science curriculum based in watersheds. And I'm very interested in the students learning more about their, not only their jurisdictional lands, but their ancestral domain. And because I can't know the cultural connections and relationships that are very special in that landscape, I use a watershed approach, which is a great way to bring in a lot of different disciplines and ideas, while at the same time helping the students learn more and more about those lands, waters, and wildlife that they're a big part of. That's an example, and I I know that there are other teachers that are working really well together to develop these community-based units, and I think that just from my perspective, I think that there really is no subject that can't be related to community, and I'm very happy to see that there has been this sort of shift in focus from externally derived curriculum to internally derived curriculum that's more focused for the students and more relatable for the students. So for those faculty, to get back to your question, I think it's just a matter of continuous exposure. There's not a list of things that we go over with everybody. It's just a matter of just being around and being a part of it.
Yeah, I like your terminology about internally derived versus externally. That's very important. Good point. I wanted to give you, Dr. Dozier, a moment too. You've been at Santa Fe Indian School for a very long time and have experienced all kinds of ebbs and flows in the school. I'm wondering if you have any insights as to things that you've observed, ways that Indigenous and non-Indigenous staff are working together and strengthening the faculty in the ways that you all teach.
I haven't been at Santa Fe Indian School as long as Mark, but almost. I'm not sure if this is going to exactly get to it, to your question, Janice. But Mark has, so as he said, he started as a regular science teacher at Santa Fe Indian School, and then in the early to mid 90s, Santa Fe Indian School under Superintendent Joseph Abeda and our board chair Regis Pecos really wanted us to explore this concept of a community-based education model. And they identified, I think, 4 staff to work on that model. And they didn't, for the first year, they didn't teach. They became really immersed in community, thought about how their subject would be articulated through projects that the communities needed help with. And Mark was part of that, as was a non-native math teacher, but our community liaison was from one of the communities, one of the pueblos nearby, so in that way you had the non-native and the native working very closely together on developing this community-based education model, which now, as Mark was describing, has really become integrated throughout the school. But I think through that process, they also set a lot of foundations for ways that non-native staff could enter into community discussions. A colleague and I were talking just yesterday about the impact of No Child Left Behind on our educational system at Santa Fe Indian School. So, No Child Left Behind was the very early 2000s, our community-based education model was taking off at that point, and because of No Child Left Behind and the focus on having to make AYP, that program took a bit of a back burner to emphasis on ELA and reading, and several of our very innovative projects we couldn't sustain them because of that focus, and because it took so long for not just ESSA to come to be articulated, but also negotiated rulemaking with the Bureau of Indian Education and negotiated rulemaking committee to articulate what our requirements are as a Bureau of Indian Education school. There's been this period where we haven't had to make AYP or to do it to demonstrate a school grade, and that has been very freeing and allows us to really flourish. Our students are doing better than ever before. We still send significant numbers of students to Ivy League schools. And we feel just as importantly, significant numbers of our students go directly from high school graduation into their communities where they have living wage jobs that are a result of being part of like Mark's classes. They help out with our watershed. Their SHP projects, their senior honors projects lead to solutions that they're actually able to implement upon before graduation and then continuing afterwards. And so there's I think as my colleague and I were talking yesterday, just a little bit of trepidation that now that we are going to be held accountable to standards that the Bureau has set, or that the state has set, how are we going to maintain this really innovative and effective approach? And
yeah, I wanted to add something. Anya mentioned this earlier about being responsive to what our communities want or need. And I think that this needs to be understood that when we first began this community-based model, we realized very quickly it could not be that we would go to a community and ask if we could bring students to do something. What really became apparent was we needed to be equal partners with our communities. And it was through bringing the leadership in and explaining what the idea was that we were given the green light to then develop relationships with entities within the communities. And those relationships have flourished and changed and evolved over several, more than 2 decades now. So when we have the opportunity to work with the community, we emphasize that in many cases, we want to a context where the students can do something that they may not have the personnel, the time, or the funding to do themselves. And this adds a new, a more authentic kind of richness to the curriculum. And it really is, to me, much more reflective of that respectful approach to the communities and bringing the community members in as equal partners with the education process. So I think that's a part of it as well.
Yeah, that's becoming very clear as we listen to these examples and the programs and projects that you all are supporting at your school. I just want to take one quick moment to encourage all of our participants to take our survey. The link is in the chat. We will also, there we go, the QR code is on the screen. But we're going to leave that code there and just continue on with our discussion with our panelists. We have a number of questions and discussion topics that have come in during our time together. So let's start with this one around supporting cultural competency. Many of us are non-natives. How can we further our cultural competency? And then there's a kind of a part 2 here. I'll let our panelists think about. Is cultural humility a helpful construct for orienting and training teachers? I'll open it up to see who might have thoughts on either of these. Furthering our cultural competency and cultural humility as a construct for orienting teachers.
I think cultural humility is good no matter what you do. I think regardless of whatever vocation of life you're in, I think it's important to do that. But I think that in terms of the idea about the non-native teacher teaching native students, or what the idea of cultural competency, educating yourself in terms of looking at the history of the area. I think I've said this before, but understanding the history, the difficult history, not just the history, but the difficult history of the place that you're teaching at. I think understanding the sociology, the economic system, even understanding how towns were established, because we have the idea about border towns, and border towns are places of a great deal, they're very contentious places in terms of race relations. And we just need to look at what's happening in New Mexico with the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. I mean, that's a huge issue here. And I think that if you come to New Mexico and you watch the news, you're like, oh my God, I didn't know that was happening, but it's been happening forever. And I think sometimes what we see in educator preparation programs is we see this focus on this black-white binary, and we never look at the other people like Indigenous peoples, Latinx peoples, Asian peoples, and all the other populations of people racially and culturally, so that they come with some understanding of race and how race operates, but they don't fully understand what it means in that context. So a lot of it, I think, is just reading on your own and really just reading the history and being able to communicate with the people that in the community, understand what are the moments of activism, what are people concerned about? Is it environmental racism? Are they concerned about missing and murdered Indigenous peoples? Are they worried about the impact of tourism on a community? I mean, I'm naming issues that are critical to New Mexico. And why are we educating people? Are we just educating for them to be just part of this capitalist society, or are we educating them to make important contributions to their sovereign nations? And that's part of it, is that, you know, we want them to be critical, or for them to have this critical consciousness so that it directs them to be leaders at some point of their native nations. Ultimately, that's what we want, because these, you know, our children are our gifts, you know, so that's what I think.
Dr. Martinez, can I add on to that? There was another question. Could you please explain the meaning of culturally responsive and culturally relevant pedagogy? And there's an add-on, aren't all the culturally, in quotes, topics almost the same?
Well, actually, I mean, I could answer that, but I think I'd like to hear from Dr. Begaye and Dr. Dozier about that, because I think they could probably speak to that. I mean, one of our colleagues, Tiffany Lee, talks about culturally sustaining pedagogy. So that's even going a step further, but maybe the other two would like to respond to that. Culturally responsive and culturally relevant.
I can take a stab at this. I think when you're talking about culture, you're talking about what kind of culture. And as you try to narrow it down to Native people, what's happening is we have a long history of dealing with outside cultures. And our people have learned to cope with that. Our people have learned to survive in the midst of all that. And now our children are doing the same thing. So our elders, our ancestors have learned to deal with that, and they have learned to survive. Our parents, our parents did, and we are now, our children are dealing with that. The same context that's always been there, that this kind of sense of oppression and that they're growing up in. And so how can we best educate children who have always been subject to this kind of attitude and this kind of racism? And so it's not easy to educate young folks who have grown up in such an environment. They know how to be defensive, they know how to survive, and they're not always open to hearing what you say as a teacher or as an educator. So it's really about how do you gain their trust in the classroom to convince them that what you're telling them is what they should learn, that's what they should know, and that's what's being considered as an important piece of knowledge for the larger world. That's a really hard issue to deal with, and the context for many of them on many tribal. I've been to a number of tribal reservations in the last 2 or 3 years, The context in each place is different. The language issue is different in with each tribe. And in the classroom, they all come from so many variety of backgrounds, some from great backgrounds and some from not so good, some really challenging environments which they come from. So then what is the cultural context? What is culturally relevant? It has to do with their ability, your ability to show them how they can relate to their own context and their home environment, and how they should be learning what you are teaching them. And that's where the social cultural context becomes so important. What do you teach children in today's world? And then the other context that you have to deal with them is many of them come from these hard social environments. And the only thing that they get exposed to is the Western world, this capitalist world that we all live in. And they're now caught in the middle, if you will. Their mindset is, yes, this cultural capitalist society in which we live in. That's what they don't call it that, but that's what we know. That's what it is, and we know that. But that's what we're grooming them for. So, what are we really valuing? Their background, their language, and who they are as Native people? Not in the Western world. No, we don't do that. That's where this comes in. What do we mean by culturally relevant, culturally appropriate? That's taking their context and valuing them, gaining their trust as a result of that, and showing that this is the Western world, what we call knowledge. This is your world, where you come from. This is where you're going, and how are you going to put these two together and make the person that you want to be, that we want our children to be. We want our children to take this side and take who they are, bring them together, and make great citizens of it. That's what we are trying to do. And that's what we mean by what is a culturally appropriate, culturally relevant education.
Thank you. You mentioned language. We do have a question about that. Where does language revitalization fit in? And are there examples at Santa Fe Indian School where you have integrated students' home languages?
So we integrate language in a variety of ways. We have academic classes for some of the languages. We should back up a bit. So we have 19 pueblos in New Mexico, and each of those pueblos has their own way of speaking their language. So we consider they have their own language. That's a little simplistic, but so most of the tribes want their children to learn the dialect of their particular pueblo. So that's a minimum of 19, plus we have Navajo and 2 Apache nations in New Mexico. And then Santa Fe Indian School also has students from around the continent. So right now we're offering, I think, 5 academic classes in a native language. That's just scratching the surface. Our after school program provides shorter term, non-credit native language classes that are really much more experiential than the academic classes are, where students are perhaps making a craft and the language is being spoken. And then there are also informal ways that our after school program is doing that. And then we try to encourage language integration as much as possible. Many of our, particularly dormitory staff, but our teachers as well, speak their language and will speak to students who are from their same language group, and the students are encouraged to respond. And more you're hearing the languages. What's also happened in the past few years is that I think many, if not most, of our staff can greet in several different languages, and that's kind of cool. It's not revitalizing or maintaining the language, but it's honoring the language. Our students also are more and more are asking that they be able to perform isn't quite the right word, but they'll want to dance the traditional dances, and will have somebody on campus who is supporting their dancing, and so we make time for that, and that of course has the language embedded in it, but we certainly don't have the answer to language revitalization and maintenance within an academic setting.
Right. It does sound, however, like your staff are really honoring where students are coming from and giving them the time and the space to express themselves authentically. And that is very important. And there's a question that has come in for any of you really, but do the tribes provide curriculum material for border or urban communities on their ancestral lands? Are you pulling curriculum, from the tribes themselves?
I think tribes, again, remember, first thing you always have to think about is when we talk about Native people, as I was saying earlier, this tribe is here for language, culture, here, and they're all in different places. Each tribe is different. Not all of them are in the same place when it comes to languages. One is over here, one is over here. And they're all in their different state of what linguists would call language shift. Language change, social cultural change is happening everywhere. Some tribes are more affected than others, some are less affected than others. And so you have to look at them each individually by tribe and begin to say, okay, where are they at? Where does revitalization fit in? Mm-hmm. Yes, for this tribe. No, for those tribes. Where does immersion fit in? Well, it's relevant to this one over here and relevant to this one. We can do that there. Where does maintenance come in? It's over here, over here. Where can we teach bilingual, two-way, monolingual courses over here and not over here? So you have to look at them and say, and that's what I'm dealing with. When it comes to language learning, first thing I think you have to know is our kids in tribal schools are, in most schools, in most tribes, the only time they get exposed to their language is probably 50 minutes a day in a classroom. Outside of that, the language is not being reinforced. The culture is probably reinforced, but not the language. So when and where can they have an opportunity to learn their language? There's only one place. That's where you have to realize. And linguists will tell you that 50 minutes in a 24-hour day is not enough for one to relearn the language, and build and grow and develop that language. It's just enough for that single minute, and it goes back down. And the next thing, that back down. So it's not improving, getting better. Everybody's done. It's here. We're at a point in society where parents of these children that we work with do not speak the language. Many of them, I hear this is sad to hear, but some of these parents will say, I don't want my child to learn your language. Not anymore, because where is it relevant in a larger society? That's sad for me to hear, but that's where we are at. Our kids are learning less and less of the language. They're still exposed to many of the culture, but when it comes to language learning, it's really sad and unfortunate, but it's going to remain here and it's going to go here. It's going to go that way. It's not going this way. I see that happening, and that's sad to say. But we have to do what we can, I think, and we are.
Dr. Ericson, did you have some thoughts around whether or not tribes are providing some curriculum material to support your students?
In the program that I'm a part of, we do a lot of work with some communities, and in that sense, the curriculum they're providing is the experiences that we give the students in those communities, working with those community members. And many times language is a part of that. And I think that in a sense, to get back to the earlier question about the difference between cultural responsiveness and cultural relevancy, I was thinking of an example that strikes me in terms of the subject matter that I emphasize. And that has to do with, I could teach students about the effects of climate change, and that could come from any number of different sources. And that might be showing them how it might affect the communities in northern New Mexico, or in New Mexico in general, the Southwest. And in a way, that's the relevancy part of it. The responsiveness part of it is when we actually go into the communities, or we invite community members to come and talk about it, and to talk about it from their perspective, or if we create research opportunities for students to go find out what is important in those communities, or the communities that they're from. And I wanted to also mention that there's another place where this happens for the entire school community, and that is in every morning students come to a special class. It's a 30-minute class called Brave Connections. And in that, each week we focus on a particular foundational topic or core value, and we bring in community members to talk. It's done by video, but we show interviews with community members on different topics related to that. And very often language becomes a part of that. So there's this, I don't think there's any one particular bullet, or it's a lot of different ways that this can happen. And it has to be many different ways, because as Dr. Begaye was pointing out, there's so many differences between the students, the backgrounds that they come from, the communities they come from. So this is a much more, I don't know what the right word is. It's a place where they can all learn from each other, and learn from each other what their challenges are, and even help each other. So that's
a nice way to bridge what's going on in their communities with what's going on in their school environment. I'm going to take a moment now to really thank all of you for being a part of our discussion this afternoon, and for engaging in these thought-provoking questions. We want to also thank everyone who has attended this afternoon. We hope you found the presentation to be worthwhile and relevant for the great work you're doing to support the learning and development of children and youth. I want to make you aware that we've put the link to the feedback survey in the chat. Please take a moment to complete that. That's important feedback for us. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. There are a couple of ways you can stay connected to the REL Southwest if you are interested to do that. Please check out our website. You can get quick answers to your research questions with the Ask a REL section. In addition, our website also has overviews of our studies, some infographics, videos, blogs, published reports, all kinds of things. So please visit our website and stay connected with us. If you are interested, you can join our newsletter. And always feel free, if you would like to reach out. Lacey Wood is available. Her email is on the screen here. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you. Take care.